Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever this video finds you. This is Deep Dive. Hey, so welcome to our first episode of Deep Dive in 2025. Unfortunately, we won't be able to do a sermon recap because of weather conditions. We're having a rainstorm, freezing ice, kind of covering over Missouri. So we'll pick that up next week. But this episode will be covering Genesis 1 through 11 and Job 1 through 9. This episode is titled Creation, the Fall, and the Trials of Job. So we have with us, we have Hannah, my wife, we have Patty, and we have Brandon.
Nice to be here.
You guys to join us, especially when it's downpouring outside. But so just to kind of go over some highlights, from what we've read so far, we've seen some key themes. We've seen creation, we've seen sin, faith, suffering, and the best of all, hope. So day one, we covered Genesis 1 through 3, God's creation of the world and humankind and the fall of Adam and Eve. So do we have anything on that we want to open up with? Does anyone have anything interesting that they think?
I noted a few things. So on verse 2, chapter 1, verse 2, where he says, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Before, I feel like when I've read that, I kind of just went right past that verbiage, the Spirit of the waters. And so she talks about in the recap how, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit were all there from the very beginning. And so when we're talking about the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, that was in reference specifically to the Holy Spirit. So I thought that was a very, good point. Like once I heard that in the recap and I went back and was reading it in my Bible, I was trying to look for those words and things that she was talking about. And so that really stuck out to me.
Yeah. And for those that are listening and joining in, we are reading from the Bible Recap, which is by Tara-Leigh Cobble. You can go to her website or you can actually download and follow the plan on the Bible app. So that's the plan that we're doing. And yeah, so no, that is very interesting. She did do a recap on that too. And she kind of covered something in regards to the days being literal. Like there's a school of thought that there's new Earth, which is this Earth was created 7,000 years ago. Each day was literal a day. Then there's the other school of thought where it could have time to God. God is outside of time. And so it could have taken thousands upon thousands of years to us, but to him it was a day. So because to him it's going to happen in real time, but to us it's going to take a long time. I thought that was pretty interesting. So, one thing that I do have here that I kind of looked at was there's two actual creation events in Genesis. We have Genesis 1, which is the big picture creation. And then we have Genesis 2, which is more of a zoomed in version of the creation of human. So I thought that was kind of something too, because God created all of the universe, created all of Earth, and then he populated the Earth with animals and human. So I thought that was a pretty noteworthy thing. So actually one of the things that I have here is what does it mean to reflect God in how we live and how we love? And this pertains to being made in God's image.
I have a note here. It says 4 ways you are human.
Okay.
Which kind of fits into the made in God's image. The first one is morality. We have right from wrong. The second one is activity. This goes into where God said, to multiply, increase, and then rule over the animals of the earth. Our being, which is our soul. We all have souls that God created. And then community. We were meant to be with other people and God. So...
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
My Bible had a really good point too about specifically the made in our image. Again, notice that it says our, again, talking about all three being there together. So that stuck out to me as well. But my Bible had a little clip on the side that said, what does it mean to be made in his image? So the point of an image, if you think about it, is to image and to reflect. So when you look at yourself in the mirror, you are reflecting. So to reflect, images are erected in public to display the original, to point to the original. So glorify the original. So God made humans in his image so that the world would be reflectors of God, images of God, so that nobody would miss the point of his creation, which is to rule over creation as representatives of God and to point others back to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, image, sometimes I think it is literal. It's simple. Image means reflection.
Yeah.
So,
my Bible also talks about how we actually can't see God's face, and it says God walked in the garden with Adam and Eve. But the thing that we can also remember is that God is the creator of everything. Mm-hmm. So he can take human form. He can take a form of what gives to an appearance of a face, a body, I thought that was a pretty notable thing. I actually have something else too that I was wondering is, which obviously the elephant in the room, we don't read until day 2, or no, sorry, we're on day 1 still, 1 through 3. We don't read this until 3. The tree of good and evil, the tree of knowledge. So my question for that, well, before I go on, does anybody have anything else to add to days 1 and 2, the creation in itself? I know that Tara-Leigh talked about how God planted the garden.
Yes.
And I believe that you actually sent that to me. So, and I was like, okay, I really need to watch these videos because I haven't seen it yet. And then after after it talked about it, I was like, oh wow, that's, you can just gloss over it and forget that there's these key words that are in here. And when God planted, that means he had to have worked and toiled and made the ground and shifted the ground for this garden to grow. And
he could have just spoken into existence.
Right.
Instead, it says he planted, which means he did the work.
Right.
And she talked about God the Father gives the creation commands. And then the New Testament later tells us that God the Son is the one who did the manual labor of creating the things in response to the Father's commands. And then the God the Spirit hovers over the creation, sustaining and approving it all.
Mm-hmm. I actually do have a note for the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 account. This is regards to evolution. Obviously, we grow up with being taught evolution is fact and things. And no, I'm not here to detest that, but I do want to make a note. And this is kind of what my Bible talks about. It says, if evolution merely refers to a process of cyclical, which is back and forth, variation in response to changing environmental conditions, then evolution is a fact that can be observed both in nature and in laboratory experiments. For example, when a population of insects is sprayed with a deadly chemical like DDT, the most susceptible insects die, but the individuals most resistant to the poison survive to breed and leave offspring, which inherit the genes that provide resistance. After many generations of insects have been sprayed, the entire surviving population may be compromised from the resistant variety, and some new form of insect control will have to be applied. Such changes are not permanent. However, because the resistant mosquitoes are more fit than others, only for as long as the insecticide is applied, when the environment becomes free of the toxic chemical, the insect population tends to revert back to what it was before. The greatest weakness of this theory of evolution is that science has not discovered a process that can create all necessary information, which can be likened to, and this is more of my field, to the software that directs a computer. Without such a demonstrated creative process, evolution is merely a story because its supposed mechanism can neither be duplicated in a laboratory nor observed in nature. I thought that was I was like, yeah, that's definitely, because I've always got hung up on that. Like, the earth was created this way, but then the Bible doesn't really talk about evolution. And we're taught that. So I'm trying to join my academia with, my faith. And it just comes to find out that maybe there's something more to the biblical side of things rather than science is always right, because, but yeah, that's kind of what I had on that one. Anything else on Genesis 1 and 2?
No.
All right. So 3, Genesis 3, we're still in day 1, where it talks about, this is where the fall of man happened. And my question is, why do you think God allowed the choice to eat from the forbidden tree? Because it's something that I've heard before, and I've every single time I hear this line and she was listening to it, I'm like, listen to this part. This is very it goes back to the words, right? God said to Eve and Adam, "Do not eat from this tree, you will surely die." When the serpent came down and said, what did God say about eating from the tree? What did Eve say? God said we can eat from the garden, but we must not eat from the tree of knowledge nor touch it. God never said not to touch it. I think in that moment, the serpent knew that Eve did not have the scripture or knew what God said. She may have had the generalization. That's kind of what you were saying. But she didn't have it known as a confident in her heart. Like, no, God said just don't eat it. We can touch it. But serpent used it as a way to twist it to say, see, you can touch it and you won't die. And that was the serpent's way to get to her. So just little things like that was very insightful. I was like, man, and I heard that from another video talking about that. But yeah, so why do you think God allowed the choice to eat from the forbidden tree?
Well, I want to add to that too, just real quick before we go into that question. So mine says, he says to man. So that he commanded that to Adam. So then I thought, okay, well, did Adam tell Eve that was...
I said that too because Michael said that woman is the downfall.
I was like, woman is the downfall because look it.
And I said, no, hang on, man had a part in this.
Absolutely, he did.
He ate from it.
He did. He did.
It says, mine, I mean, and every version may be different, but I know it says, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it says, I'm sorry, and the Lord God commanded the man in verse 16. That's how mine reads. So just saying, ultimately,
just saying,
Adam must have either not told Eve or he told her wrong.
Something.
Listen.
And we're down. And you know what? We're going to talk about that. Actually, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. So we'll see you soon. We are back from the break and we had to have a little bit of a conversation about man not communicating with Eve. Anyway.
It seems to be a continued repetition.
Yeah, no communication. Okay, so we left off with Genesis 3. I did have a note about, because I'm sure somebody is going to mention the serpent, like why the serpent, how did the serpent even get in there in the first place? Well, God created all of the animals. And we can't also forget that the serpent doesn't necessarily mean Lucifer or, now we can say Satan because Satan means adversary of the Lord. It doesn't necessarily mean the devil, right? So one thing that my Bible actually does say, and I thought this was very interesting, was, so this is Genesis 3:1. While snakes do not speak, this is more than just a folk story explaining why people tend to find them repulsive. The animal's life is finite and will end in a future destruction, all the days of your life, and that's verse 14. Snakes and serpents in ancient times were associated with both life and death, wisdom and evil. And you can see that in Numbers 21:6-8 and Matthew 10:16. Thus they served as effective symbols for wisdom that gives life or for evil that leads to death. Though a literal creature, the serpent in the garden embodied the evil being, Satan, that opposed God and the human couple. And you can see that with Job 1 and 2, Zechariah 3:1-3, and Romans 16:20. The serpent was an unclean animal and symbolized the enemies of God. The snake talked to the woman as would a deceitful opponent, which we see that the snake deceived Eve because Eve said two things of what God said, but one of them was true and one of them God didn't say. So that's how the serpent knew, hey, you made a mistake there, and now I know. So, but yeah, and we also see that the evil spirits later on when Jesus takes the legion and puts them all into the pigs. So we know that spirits can inhabit animal, right? So, All right. We are moving on to day number 2, which is Genesis 4, 5, 6, and 7. So basically, a summary of those chapters is Cain kills Abel, sin spreads, Noah finds favor with God and builds the ark. The flood begins. Does anybody have a fun fact they would like to share, or anything they want to start it off with that they've encountered with those chapters?
We're in 4.
Yep. Genesis 4 through 7.
This goes back to your snake thing.
Oh, okay.
They're used in medical. Have you ever noticed on like an ambulance how there's the snakes in the symbol, the life and death?
Yeah.
So that's a fun fact too.
I didn't even think about it because, the serpent's wrapping around up the staff. And also the staff, Moses, what did he use with the staff? Like what was it? He's leading people with the staff, but then people were afraid of the snakes, of biting them. If I remember correctly. I can't remember correctly. We'll when we get to that, we'll
I do have some things still back in chapter 3, like when we later, if we want to get back to it. I want to
a
couple things, but
yeah, you can talk about it now.
Okay, you're talking specifically about the tree of life and the tree of good and evil. So something that kind of stuck out to me was God placed 2 trees in the center of the garden, tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And he tells Adam that he cannot eat from the tree or he will surely die, which to me shows that he made humans with the ability to choose with free will. And then quickly we see that they did not follow his commandments. Once they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, God then takes away their ability to eat from the tree of life anymore. And he bans them from there and says, that the ground, he curses the ground. And then he says, and you will surely die. So it made me think that had they only ate from the tree of life as commanded, then they could have been eternal beings on earth with God forever. But because they sinned and they ate from the tree of knowledge, they no longer had that ability to live forever on earth with him. And with that, we see that the average length of life has grown significantly shorter as time goes on, which makes me think that as more sin evolves over time on earth, that the shorter average lifespans become in the future. So you see Methuselah, who lived to 969 years, and then Noah, 500 years, Jacob, 147. Each time it's going down. And there's also all this more and more and more sin in the world. And then I just put, but God, because of his mercy, he still gives sinners the opportunity to have eternal life with him in heaven if we feed ourselves with his bread and his living water. So that was my takeaway about the trees specifically.
Yeah, I also had something to actually piggyback about what you said about the sin and how they recognize good and evil. God grants Adam and Eve real freedom, right? Including the choice to trust his definition of good and what is evil, or to define it on their own. But yet when they ate from the tree, their eyes were open and now they saw what actually is, which is the first. When I talked with you, Hannah, I mentioned one of the things that stood out to me was, what did they immediately do after they bit from the apple? They recognized each other were naked, which to me, that means the eye was flooded with lust. That means they saw something in each other that was shame or embarrassed.
So I was going to say, you introduce all of these other emotions that wouldn't exist.
Right. It was innocent. It was pure, like what you mentioned. You said pure before, and it was like this innocent love of each other. But now this sin entered, and it got between both of them, and now they could have looked at each other with lust now, which is a very devastating characteristic of a side of romance and or love, or however we want to put that. But, so anything else before we move on to Dave?
I do have one more thing.
Okay, yeah.
In 3:21, I think it's important to note that God made garments of skin for Adam and Eve to cover their nakedness, which was animal skin, which signifies the first animal blood sacrifice that was made. So God made the first sacrifice in the Bible, and I never really realized that before. That didn't really click to me. And so I felt like that was important, and that is foreshadowing to, you know, Christ's offering, whose righteousness covers our sin. In both cases, the blood was shed because the shedding of blood is what is necessary for the forgiveness of our sins. So also, just a funny note, like my Bible, when I read that, okay, y'all, I'm blonde and, you know, I'm real literal. So I'm reading that. Let me just find it because you're going to laugh at me. It was not on that page. 321, right? Is what it said?
Yes.
Where'd it go?
It
Mine has like a commentary thing in the middle, so it's like, meh. Okay. The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. So I'm like, Jason, like they didn't have skin? What's that? What is that? What does that mean? And then I'm
like he like fabricated skin over them. It's like so they were walking around skin and bones. No, bones and muscles.
Skeleton.
So I wasn't going to tell you that because I was really embarrassed that I thought that. But then I was like, you know what? I can't be the only person that's read that and was like, oh.
No, I thought that, but I was like, no, surely he meant animal skin.
He was looking at her muscles.
Like,
wow, her muscles.
And then when they saw, I'm like, wait a second, I should be seeing your muscles.
The animal skin, and then I was like, oh, that was the first sacrifice.
You could see something.
So they thought they were naked. It's like, oh.
It's like, no, they were naked. They were beyond naked. They were like.
The nurse in me is like, these people are walking around with bones and just muscles? Like, that's weird.
I can see your meniscus.
Yeah.
Anyway. So yeah, so we're now on Genesis 4-7. We see Eve giving or bearing a son named Cain and Abel. Fun fact that I didn't know is that Cain, his name means either acquired or gotten, and you can see that in Genesis 4:1. Where it says, gotten a man with the help of the Lord. So his name is Cain, which means gotten or acquired. So that I thought that was a little tie into what Eve even said as she was proclaiming what occurred for her. And then I also have something here. Some scholars suggest Eve may have hoped Cain was the promised offspring that is mentioned in Genesis 3:15. So I thought that was kind of thing, but not so much on Cain, which there's some little insight there with even like the offering that Cain gives to God, you know. But Cain obviously kills Abel. So does anyone have anything that stood out to them? Like, I do have something. You guys
have got it. I mean,
he's just here for more support.
Just in verse 10, it says, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground."
That's powerful.
It's like, wow.
Yeah. Then he said, "What have you done?"
Yeah.
Like, I can only imagine what Memphis feels like when I say, "What have you done?" Or like, I can just imagine, "What have you done?" I'm like, "Oh, this is serious."
I know.
It's like I can just imagine what God was saying.
God
Yeah.
say
Like,
that.
what have you
my
done?
Goodness.
The Irish version was very dramatic.
Yeah. Yes. Mine was. Yeah. I don't know if you listened to the same one, but ours is. Yeah. Mine was like that.
Helpful. I feel like, really.
Yeah. One thing that I do want to make a note of is that Cain presented an offering to God from the ground that was cursed. The ground that he toiled and made his offering from was a cursed ground. But Abel brought his offering from flesh, animal flesh, and that was to God. And I can't obviously speak for God, but to me, that right there would tell me why was Cain so troubled and why did God not want to accept it, is because Cain was giving to him what he was already commanded to do. But Abel was not. No one was commanded to sacrifice animal. No one was commanded to sacrifice that meat. But yet, Abel did, and Cain just toiled stuff from the ground that he was already supposed to do. And this is my interpretation of it, but the ground that was cursed because of the fall, I can see why, God is like, hey, that's not, can you, and you can also see the faith behind the offerings too, right? Because Cain, I feel like he offered some of the produce. It wasn't all of what he could have done, and Abel, you see offering something that is very valuable.
And it says that he offered the best portions too. Like,
yes.
He gave the greatest. And I think it's important to note, I thought that Abel was a shepherd and Cain is a farmer. And like you said, the ground is cursed. And then obviously God is not pleased with Cain's, and he is with Abel's. And so my takeaway was, Abel was a shepherd, the first recorded human shepherd in the Bible, and he offers the best of his firstborn lambs in animal sacrifice, which God accepted because it was a blood offering. And then Abel, who was innocent, is the first human, you could say maybe like a human sacrifice and blood on the ground that is shed, which then cries out. And so this all points to God, to me, for his plan for how he's going to save us from our sins. Jesus is the Lamb of God. He is the good shepherd who gives his life for his sheep, and he is the lamb who was slain. He pays the ultimate sacrifice. I feel like when you know some of the pieces that come later in the Old Testament about, the things that are coming with, when they actually list the commandments and those things, this time around, I feel like I'm seeing some of that foreshadowing easier because of, because of that.
Yeah. I think it's a great point to talk about. We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll come back and we'll actually talk more about actually the marking of Cain, the vengeance of 7 times, and Lamech, and how he used, and this is my interpretation, I talked to you about it, how he used Cain's situation for himself later on. So we'll see you guys in a moment. All right, we are back from that break. We had to adjust some memory cards and things like that. So we left off where we were talking about Cain and how he was introduced and how he basically X'd Abel. So one thing that I noticed with Cain, and I also mentioned that Cain's name means acquired or gotten. Does anybody else have anything to add to that before I go into this note that I took about something?
You got it.
I got it. I'm kind of needing someone to speak so I can get to my note real quick. Just kidding. No, so when Cain, when he says that because the ground that was cursed now because of what he's done, and nothing of what he will do will produce any yield. It will not produce anything for him. And Cain realizes this, and you can hear Cain's in anguish say, his judgment or his punishment's too much to bear. And he goes, because he's going to be wandering the earth. He's just a wanderer. And God now, or Cain says, and if whoever finds me will kill me, right? But then God said, no, there will be a mark on him, and if anyone slays him, then they will face vengeance of 7 times. Mm-hmm. Well, later on, we hear Lamech, which is an offspring of Cain, talk about, well, you heard that it was said about Cain, whoever killed Cain will suffer vengeance of 7 times. Whoever kills me will suffer it 77 times. But notice that it came from Lamech and didn't come from God. God is the one that put the emphasis on the 7 times for Cain. But Lamech, that was his own way of saying, well, you saw what happened to Cain. If you do anything to me, then it's going to happen even worse. But that wasn't from technically God. That was from Lamech saying it, not so much from God to Cain. That's one thing I noticed. I thought it was kind of...
I took it like Lamech was actually bragging. So he's the first one to have more than one wife, which we
polygamy, yeah.
Shadows to, that a later commandment that will come. And then he killed a person as well. And then it was like he was like boasting about it. Like, well, if, my dad, he killed one person and it'd be 7 times, but for me, it'd be 77. I don't know.
Because he's kind of like going down. Yeah, like he killed someone because he was wounded. Like,
yeah, it's like he had no remorse to me.
Yeah, like now that you say that, yeah, that does make sense that he was kind of like bragging about that.
but it's like it's more sin. You know, we're seeing again someone being killed, him having more than one wife, things about the commandments that will later come.
If you also, do you know how long that Lamech lived?
No.
777 years.
Wait a second. 77 times, and then wow.
But
Interesting.
was that Lamech, or was it the other? Was it Seth's Lamech?
It might be Seth's Lamech.
I'm not sure that it, but yeah, it is 770. I wrote
Yeah.
that. But I think that is the good. I'm going to call it the good Lamech.
Yes.
Yeah. Another note
It
I
was
made.
interesting.
Yeah, no, that is interesting because
Absolutely.
you're talking about 7 and 77 and now 777.
Cain,
So it's almost like
yeah.
this, like,
Yeah.
you know, these jumping points from, and it's funny that 777 is a number that keeps repeatedly popping up. You know, to kind of go back when we were talking about it off camera about genealogies, and when we're like, oh man, we got to read through all this and like, what does this mean? But one thing that this guided note was talking about is that like the family trees in Genesis 5 show a repeated cycle of, and then he died. That is also, you can infer from that mortality is being displayed there. Like there is no infinite no more. We're not living forever. No, it's a reminder that death is now part of the cycle. And I thought that was a pretty cool little note here. That sometimes genealogies may not be the best to read every single name, but it's also a reminder, you know, of, you know, because if you read later on a new genealogy, or not a new one, but the rest of the genealogies, you know that Jesus is part of these genealogies, right? So this is also a way to corroborate the lineage all the way tracing back to Adam. And you hear that in Luke. You know, Luke goes all the way back to Adam from current time. But yeah, I just thought that was pretty interesting about Lamech when he was like, well, 77 times. And I'm just like, hold on, man. Hold on. You don't get to say whatever you want. Like, who said? Who said?
And on the genealogies, they're hard. They're hard to read, right? Especially as like the first time, you're like, oh my goodness, and it just keeps going. So this time, I was like, I'm gonna get through this, and I'm gonna try to. What is it trying to say? Like, so I'm looking for things that stick out. So some things that I noticed, so genealogy, it talks about Cain's genealogy, and you notice that it's just him and his people only. Okay. And that's in chapter 4. Then it goes, chapter 5 goes into Adam's genealogy, and Cain and Abel are not listed. Abel has died. Cain is, you know, forbidden. He's, you know, placed elsewhere. They are not listed in Adam's genealogy, so that stuck out to me. But if you look at how chapter 5 starts, when it does go into Adam's genealogy, it says, let me find it. This is the written account of the descendants of Adam. When God created human beings, he made them to be like himself. He created male and female, and he blessed them and called them human. So he's talking about the ones in his image, and then it starts with Seth and goes down his lineage, which we find out that Seth is the lineage that links to Jesus. So I found that very interesting. Cain and Abel are not listed under Adam. Adam's lineage is starting with Seth, the third son, and it's talking about the ones made in his image. So I feel like it's like I made a note about all of the righteous ones that come from Seth, or from Adam's, you know, righteous line with Seth. You have, where is it at? Somewhere. Anyway.
Well, you know, to kind of piggyback while you're looking for that note, you know, there's going to be some questions in regards to, wait a second, so Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, how does Cain have a wife? Who are them? Who are the people that he has a wife to, right? Because there's no other mention of other people.
Right.
You know, the Bible doesn't specifically state that there was pre-humanite or pre-human, you know, here. But one thing that we can look at is that God told Eve and Adam to go and populate the earth. So it is very much possible that yes, the people that are here are from Adam and Eve. Yes, the Bible doesn't explicitly go through that lineage, but it paid very close attention to what you're talking, like how Cain and Abel, how they were disappeared later on, but there was a focal point on them at one point, and think about it. Like how you talked about the animal skin was the first animal sacrifice. Well, Abel was the first death of a human. So I think that's kind of something to kind of think about in there. And
I feel like there was other people there. It's just not zoomed on them. Like, you got to think all of it. There's so many details that we're not given.
Right.
And so I feel like we're like, we want to know those details. So then we kind of like question, like, why wasn't that there? Why is this there? But I mean, obviously there's women there. Probably their sisters, who knows? And
that kind of reminds me too, if you guys have any questions or in regards to what we're talking about now or future readings, just go ahead and email deepdive@libertyhill.church and we can bring them up on the show here and we will talk about them. And of course, we'll keep it anonymous unless you want your name to be said, but we'll keep it anonymous and we'll just talk about the questions. So don't forget to email that, and we'll leave that in a link in the description below. So, one of the things that stood out to me too was like, I'm approaching 40. I know this. But anyway, but Adam had a kid when he was 130. I mean, let's talk about that for a second.
I've always wondered if they aged differently, because if they were dying at 900, that would to them be like 80s, like to us,
Yeah.
That's the only way that it would make sense. There's no way that you can have a very old man.
For like what were their years? Were their years 365 days? Like, we don't know.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah. That's true. I mean, God did say He created the seasons, so we do know there was 4 cycle of seasons. Whether or not 365 days, 422 days. I mean, I don't know.
But I mean, hey, if humans populated the Earth for 960 days, like,
yeah.
Can you imagine all the amount of humans? So it's like,
yeah. It's true.
Yeah, that was something that kind of stood out to me. It was just like, wait a second, they are getting up there in age, but then you also see that after the 120-year threshold has been placed, you see Zechariah and Elizabeth. You see them bear a child when she was way beyond in her years, so it's still something. Maybe it is there. Maybe they did age, but it was slowed down,
slower.
But I don't know. Hopefully it was Zechariah.
Or maybe it was and then it just was shortened over time. Like I said, earlier, was it because of the sin? And because I read something about that the more sin was introduced, then the lifespans have shortened and things like that. So I don't know. Some things we'll never know.
I want to point out too, Brandon, you said something off camera, and I'd like for you to share it because I thought it was very interesting about, and we're going to go back to Eve for a second because I thought this was pretty cool. And this is something that he pointed out. And and I've read Genesis. I'm just like Tara-Leigh Cobble. I'm a Genesis scholar at this point. I've read it probably 10 plus times. And I never even thought about this. So,
I'm new to reading it. I just thought that it was a little odd that the only animal that could talk was talking to her, and she did not question it at all. Being a serpent,
she listened.
She was just like, Bob, you're right. This talking serpent just comes onto the scene and says, "Hey, surely you won't die." I would have been me personally. If a snake would have come spiraling down and said, "Hello," I'd have been like, I would have tripped out. I would have wigged out right there. But
are all the other animals talking? Was a comment?
That's a valid question. Were other animals talking?
No.
And you made a comment. Is that where Dr. Doolittle? But
I mean, I don't know.
You just never know. But I thought that was very interesting. I wanted to make sure that we highlighted that because that is something.
Well, he said too off camera that he was cursed and told him he would be on his belly. So
was it walking lizard man just having a conversation?
It's even scarier.
Or a snake. Yeah. We don't really know for sure.
Actually, my Bible does speak on something to that, on the effect of the serpent.
I was looking. I don't think mine does.
Mine does.
It might take me a second, and where is the fall happening? Because
Chapter 3, I believe.
Yeah. Verse 14? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think I already read it. And while snakes do not speak, this is more of a folk. No. Anyway, I'll find it and I'll get it to you. But it does talk about how a lot of scholars thought like the snake did like because we assumed when God casted him on his belly that he was walking. That doesn't necessarily mean that he was. It just meant, or it was just necessarily saying like for all of its days it will remain on its belly. So, do we have anything else to expand on Genesis? What are we at? Genesis 4-7, right? Day 2. Yeah, 4-7.
I would just say, like, since genealogy is hard, and I was this time trying to find things that stuck out, and that's how it really stuck out to me about Cain and Abel not being listed. Another thing I noticed was any time that it was a son that is directed to Jesus' lineage, you will see that all sons' names are listed. So, when you're looking at the other ones, there's not a lot of great detail given. But when you get to 532, it lists all 3 names of Noah's son, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And if I said those wrong, I'm sorry. But and you don't see that in all the families before, which to me, again, signifies the importance of this specific line, because Shem is the one who is listed first, and he will continue the lineage to Jesus. So I actually kind of made a note about like Adam's first, and then you have Seth, who was the 3rd son, but he's the one that was actually favored and considered righteous and the only one listed in the lineage. And then Enoch, who's the 7th full generation, Methuselah, and then Lamech, and then Noah. So all connected to the Jesus lineage.
Okay. Sorry there. So
you're gonna have to repeat everything.
That's very interesting.
To look at those, why did you not tell you all the sons' names of the other ones, but you listed it of these? And to me, it was because it's a direct link to Jesus. So that was important to take note of, and it made it a little easier for me to read all those names when I was looking for what was different.
All right.
Once I can pronounce the names, I'll be able to remember them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Japheth. I don't know. My dramatized Bible says like these names. I feel like Japheth.
I think that's how they pronounce it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you talked about the Lamech, and there's 2 of them, which I thought was like, so you got Cain who had a Lamech, and Seth who had a Lamech, and they both had fathers that had almost identical names, that Methuselah or whatever.
Oh yeah, Methuselah.
So to me, it was like, okay, you got this Cain side, who's, I'm going to say evil, right? Who has a Lamech, and then you have Seth's side, who also has a Lamech, but he's on the good side. So it was like a comparison of the good and evil. Mm-hmm. One is connected to Jesus' lineage, the other one is not.
That's very interesting. I didn't think about it like that. Okay, so this part, the Noah's Ark, fallen angels, this is going to be something to unpack, because I actually had something that I talked with Hannah you about yesterday. You know, when the flood came, first of all, let's talk about the fact that Noah's Ark, the ark itself was huge. I mean, what was it? The size of a football field. I can't remember the width. I don't remember what that was. But the height was a 4-story building.
It was big.
It was huge.
This is the length of 1.5 football fields.
Yeah. Oh.
It was exactly 6 times longer than it was wide.
Oh.
Which is the same ratio used by modern shipbuilders.
Really?
Nice.
That is very interesting.
Noah's just setting the standard.
That's a fun fact. That is interesting. But no, that, you know, Tara-Leigh Cobble said that if we look at the fallen angels and they were marrying whomever they wanted from the daughters of man, that would indicate, and you can infer from that they are male angels, because they were creating the sons of renown, or the men of renown, which if you think about the men of renown, the word renown in itself is great and mighty, which you can put that almost like a comic book hero. Like they were exhibiting special type attributes. I mean, you look at Samson, he was able to exhibit mightiness with his hair. You've got the Goliaths, you got all these different things, or the Nephilim, which came from that. But one thing that I did want to notice, and not to skip over so much of what was read, but one thing that stuck out to me about the flood was, notice that God said, I will wipe out all creatures that has the breath of life in them. Do angels or fallen angels have the breath of life? Because we see later on, and I'm sure we'll get to it, is Nephilim return on the scene. And they are regarded as giants, and as a tribe of giants. So we see the Nephilim returning. So does that mean the fallen angels that are roaming the earth, are they actually part of that flood disaster, or are they still living because they are spiritual beings that aren't necessarily breath of life beings? Something that I caught, because I was like, the more the words I'm digging into, I'm like, wait a second, this is the breath of life. Every creature has the breath of life, and that is from God. But these angels do not have the breath of life, because they are fallen angels. Angels reside in heaven. In heaven, I don't know if there's oxygen.
See, mine just says, human race I have created, so I didn't get that breath of life. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty something to know, or noteworthy.
Wouldn't have known that sons of God equals fallen angels. Had Tara-Leigh Cobble not pointed that out, I feel like reading that, I've read that so many times, but never. I did not know that. But and then it helped it make sense when then she talked, or it goes into about the evilness that is created from them with the women.
And we also notice that God chose Noah. And that tells me, and I think Tara also pointed this out, that Noah, amongst all the other people of the earth, was the righteous person to choose. That means he did not conform to this fallen angel fiasco stuff. He did not pertain to any of that. He kept his family with him, and they knew the difference between what was evil and what was good. They chose good, and they were walking with God. And something else that Hannah and I talked about when we listened to it was Enoch. He walked so close with God, God took him. It never mentioned he died.
Yeah,
it just said he took him. And I thought that was kind of like, wait, like that's, you can walk so close with God. But then we also
righteous lineage earlier. I was trying to find death to Enoch,
but then we later on we see Job walking faithfully and walking right with God. But Job wasn't taken like Enoch. In fact, something else happens to Job, and we're about to get into that, I think, right now, unless you guys have anything to add to the sons of God and Noah. I'm sure we'll come across something later, and we'll be like,
I know
man,
it's such a great story, and I feel like it's probably one a lot of people know about.
Yeah, one of the questions too is, how did he fit all of the animals on that ark? There's a lot of animals, but I think you said something, Hannah, the other day, is that maybe it wasn't every single animal. There were some animals that may have wasn't part. Did you say that?
I just think of that meme where it's like, surely God didn't let the roaches come on board. But
good point.
Or the mosquitoes.
That's right. Surely he didn't let them get on there.
They just found their way on. They hid in the termite holes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah. And I'm going to introduce this dinosaur lingo, and something that I've also heard. I don't necessarily know like 100% on this, but I have heard it, and it was a school of thought that the angels, and I think it's in Hebrews that you can find this, that angels were mating not only with human, they were mating with animal. There was a lot of evil, like that is straight evil. And these fallen angels were doing things with all of God's creation. So
anything they could to try to
anything they can do to thwart God's plan. And not to get too much into that, but my mind went immediately to, well, what was back then that could have definitely devoured or destroyed us if we lived with them? Dinosaurs. That's exactly what I thought of. Those things were huge. Just like Nephilim, they were huge. They were giants. Am I saying that dinosaurs and giants and human live together? No, but if we can see that that the sons from the fallen angels were giant. Well, I can only assume that, okay, well then what about these animal births? Are they giants too? And is that what we discovered as dinosaur? Mm-hmm. But anyway, moving forward. So now we go into Job, the faithful servant to the Lord, and yet he also bore some things that may not, he didn't quite deserve, but he was very humble. You know, based on like what I've been listening to, it almost sounds like he's yelling at God. From the sound of it, like he's like mad, he's questioning, but he never actually goes to where he flips on God. He has the right to question, like, what's going on? Why is this happening to me? You know, what are these things? But then later on, Job says that cannot me receiving, I'm paraphrasing, cannot I receive the blessing, but also can I not receive the I don't know,
like the bad stuff.
Yeah, can I not receive the bad stuff that comes from life? Yeah. You know, basically saying God's in control, and he's trusting his plan, whether it's good or whether it's bad, no matter what's going to happen, he's faithfully going to serve God. But yeah.
Yeah, this one says, like, Job did not hide his grief. He had not lost his faith in God. Instead, his emotions showed that he was human and that he loved his family. So when everything was happening, you know, when he was crying out, he never lost faith in God, but he's human like all of us. So.
You know, one thing that stuck out to me with Job was when, you know, and I think Tara covered this as well in her recap, that Satan means adversary, right? It doesn't necessarily mean the devil or Lucifer. So when we hear about Satan arriving with the angels being courted into heaven, it could have just been a fallen angel itself. And then when God asks, where did you come from? And he says, well, I was roaming back and forth on the earth. Well, we got to remember, this is post-flood. Mm-hmm. Oh, I am not trying to be kicking things down. We are back. No, I'm just kidding. But we know that post-flood, everything should have been destroyed. So that's kind of what made me think about, well, wait, the breath of life, all of those things were destroyed, but the creatures, like angels, they didn't receive the breath of life, so they would have remained, which is why we see that angel saying to God, oh, I'm wandering back and forth on the earth. And that's when he said, well, have you seen my servant Job? One thing to note that made me think about was when Satan said, well, why don't you stretch out your hand and take out his livestock? Why don't you take away these things? And then during the dinner, when his servants were running in, these people gathered and they took your livestock, and then all of a sudden fire from the heavens came down. Was that God's rain from the heavens, or was that the angels, or was that the fallen angels thing? That kind of stuck out to me, because God said that he gave the control, so much control to Satan. Not all of it, and that also displays God's ultimately in control, because he's the one that's awarding this type of control.
Well, so in this Bible it says, the fire of God has fallen from heaven and burned up your sheep and all of the shepherds.
That's how it did too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody says God is sovereign, has supreme power over all lives, activities, and circumstances. He gave the authority to the angels to do whatever they wanted to, but he did not allow them to touch Job. So he commanded them to not do that in the first chapter. He did not create the plan for the testing of Job, but he allowed it. And in his mercy, he also limited it.
Yes.
So he gave them the power to do those things. But he wasn't the one creating the test. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
That's the way I took it.
Well, do we have anything else to add to...
For Job?
Yeah.
We want to talk about his friend?
His friend. I mean, to be fair, we're still in the middle of his friend, so I kind of want to see what happens.
But I think there was something special we said about the 7 days of silence. You know?
Yeah.
And so sometimes people don't need you to talk; they just need you to be there. And I struggle with that too a lot. You know, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, If we don't got nothing else, I just want to say thank you guys for joining us on this first episode of Deep Dive, and we're going to be continuing Deep Dive next Sunday. And for this week's scripture reading, it's going to be, I believe, it's going to be the continuation of Job. We're going to be reading from 10 all the way to, I don't have my notes pulled up, but...
Actually, it's in that green book.
Oh, it's in this green book.
Nope, I got it here too.
Okay. So, Patty, would you share with...
Yeah, so day 6, Job 10 through 13, and then you go to 14 to 16, 17 to 20, and then 21 to 23, and 24 to 28.
Okay. And I'll make a post as well, and I will be sharing it along with this video. You can see it in the comment section, and then you just go ahead and follow that. But like I said, if you have any questions, be sure to send an email to deepdive@libertyhill.church, and we'll be glad to answer those questions next time. Do you guys have anything else? All right. Well, until further ado, we'll see you guys next time.